Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the Center for State's video series on the essential functions for monitoring, evaluating, and applying findings. This series is produced by the Capacity Building Center for States and funded by the Children's Bureau. The Monitoring, Evaluating, and Applying Findings brief is intended to help child welfare agency leaders, managers, and stakeholders take a structured approach to plan for and execute strategies to monitor and evaluate implementation efforts and interventions, strategies to collect and analyze data for a variety of evaluation types, and then using data to make decisions and plan for sustainability of programs where feasible. It does this by providing step-by-step guidance to strategize and develop a plan for evaluation, collect and analyze data and consider fidelity and costs, and then use results to make decisions about ongoing efforts and sustainability. The Monitoring, Evaluating, and Applying Findings brief is broken down into 4 parts and 11 essential functions or tasks. It is important to remember that while the steps are presented in a linear way, in practice, often these steps will overlap and be revisited as teams continue to monitor, evaluate, and apply their findings over time. Part 1 is setting the stage and includes considering the circumstances and needs of the agency, developing a logic model, identifying questions and identifying the data measures, sources, and collection methods that will answer them, and then developing an evaluation plan. Part 2 is collect and analyze data, and it includes strategies to put the evaluation plan into place by collecting and analyzing the data outlined, and then 2 special featured topics that are a version of data collection and analysis. They are examining fidelity and analyzing costs. Part 3 outlines how to use the data collected to make decisions and adjustments, with 2 functions on sharing findings and recommendations, and then making decisions to further spread, adjust, or discontinue. Then Part 4 is on sustainability planning, and the topic of this module is how teams should refine and implement a plan to sustain interventions when this is the decision of the team and stakeholder groups. Let's get started. Once the decision has been made to continue or adapt the intervention, teams should work on refining and implementing their plan for sustaining it. Why do teams refine and implement a sustainability plan? To have a clear and intentional roadmap for how the team plans to sustain the intervention or components of it over time. To identify what resources are available to sustain and which might need to be developed over time. And to identify the commitment and supports needed that will help sustain the intervention. How do teams refine and implement a sustainability plan? Let's outline a few common elements that should be included in a plan. The plan purpose and objectives, the team's evidence for the decision to sustain or adapt an intervention, the plan for continuing the full intervention or selected components, the action steps and sequencing that the team will take to move to sustainment, the timeline for the plan and roles and responsibilities of the team members, the projected costs and potential funding sources, any needed supports to sustain the intervention, the team's monitoring, fidelity assessment, and CQI approaches, as well as any anticipated challenges and potential solutions. Teams should think about sustainability strategies in 5 key areas. Resources. How will they sustain funding, staffing, and materials? Teams may need to spend some time researching ongoing funding streams, particularly if a grant or special project is ending. Infrastructure. How will they sustain implementation supports that facilitate staff recruitment and retention, training, coaching, fidelity assessment, data systems, and communication avenues? Knowledge and skills. What supports need to be in place to sustain intervention-specific knowledge and skills to carry out service delivery, but also program management and evaluation knowledge and skills? Culture and climate. What strategies will continue to encourage buy-in and motivation for the intervention throughout the agency, as well as continuous improvement efforts for the intervention? And engagement in partnerships. What supports will be needed to sustain partnerships with system partners, community organizations, families, and youth to support service delivery? Thinking about sustainability is often overlooked during change and implementation, and when it is considered, funding often comes to the forefront. There are a couple of quick strategies to keep in mind when developing a sustainability plan that can help teams move forward beyond funding challenges. Rather than it being an afterthought, start sustainability planning early in the implementation process and revisit the sustainability plan routinely. Involve partners and other key stakeholders in sustainability planning teams. They may offer strategies to sustain that the team had not previously considered. Rather than starting with how to pay for it, begin by asking what do we want to sustain and why, and then move into how will we sustain it. Taking these steps will strengthen the team's plans for sustainability and support their efforts to build capacity to implement them. What helps teams to refine and implement a sustainability plan? Teams should consider the following questions together when thinking about planning for sustainability. Do the outcomes merit ongoing investment in the intervention? Does the team want to sustain the full intervention or selected key components? If not, which parts should not be sustained? Are there fiscal and staffing resources to sustain the intervention? If not, how will the team build this capacity to move forward? Is there continued leadership support? Is there staff, community, and other stakeholder support? How might this impact the team's plan to sustain? Are implementation supports, for example, training, coaching, and data systems, maintainable? Additionally, what key changes need to be made, for example, in policies or procedures, to support intervention sustainability? What partners can help prepare for sustainability? How can effective communication help achieve sustainability? Have the lessons learned been shared? And are the team's plans in place for continuation of the intervention? Monitoring, evaluating, and being able to apply findings over the course of change and implementation efforts helps teams to identify the effectiveness of their efforts, support decisions about future efforts, and ultimately improve outcomes for children, youth, and families. Although presented as the last step in the change and implementation process, monitoring, evaluating, and applying findings is often the first step in an iterative cycle of ongoing monitoring and change efforts. Let's recap some of the key milestones that teams should accomplish during this process. There is a team with diverse expertise and representation to guide the change and implementation process. The team has a clearly identified problem, an analysis of the root cause or causes of the problem, and have developed a theory of change that reflects a clear pathway from the problem to a desired long-term outcome. They have identified, adapted, or designed an appropriate intervention that is well-defined, a good fit, and is feasible within the agency's system. They have readiness assessment findings that include the areas of strength and capacity needs for the selected interventions, and have developed an implementation plan appropriate to the scope of the intervention that incorporates plans to build needed capacities. And the team has conducted usability testing on key protocols and processes, have conducted pilot testing when feasible. They have used feedback and findings to adjust and make plans to stage and scale up the intervention on a larger scale, and then reviewed early progress and benchmarks throughout. Teams can refer back to any of the briefs in the series for more detailed information on milestones and essential functions that are critical during each step of the change and implementation process. Let's take a moment to check in on what you've learned about refining and implementing a sustainability plan. Why do teams refine and implement a sustainability plan? To have a clear and intentional roadmap for sustainability, identify the resources available or needed, and identify the commitment and supports that will help. How do teams refine and implement a sustainability plan? Teams should review the common elements of a sustainability plan, consider the capacities needed to sustain, and avoid the common missteps. What can help teams refine and implement a sustainability plan? Considering the cost benefit of continuing, the resources needed, the available support and motivation to sustain, any changes or communication needed, and lessons learned. Now take this a step further by reviewing the reflection questions for refine and implement a sustainability plan in your monitoring, evaluating, and applying findings workbook to connect what you've learned to your own experience. As a recap, let's review the 4 major sections and 11 essential functions in this video series on monitoring, evaluating, and applying findings. Part 1 is setting the stage and includes considering the circumstances and needs of the agency, developing a logic model, identifying questions, identifying the data measures, sources, and collection methods that will answer them, and then developing an evaluation plan. Part 2 is collect and analyze data, and it includes collecting and analyzing the data outlined, and then 2 special featured topics that are a version of data collection and analysis, examining fidelity and analyzing costs. Part 3 outlines how to use the data collected to make decisions and adjustments with 2 functions on sharing findings and recommendations and making decisions to further spread, adjust, or discontinue the intervention. And part 4 is on sustainability planning and how teams should refine and implement a plan to sustain interventions. Feel free to go back and rewatch any of the videos in this series to refresh your memory. Remember to use the Monitoring, Evaluating, and Applying Findings workbook to reflect on your learning, record any outstanding questions, and think through your next steps. Join us for the other videos in this series to learn more about the essential steps for each part of the change and implementation process.
This video was created by the Capacity Building Center for States, funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, under contract HHS P23320140033C. The content of this video does not necessarily reflect the official views of the Children's Bureau.